right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating forensic case study of the biggest automotive scandal in history. And we're going to trace a direct, undeniable line from that massive corporate failure all the way to your modern AI project management dashboards. Now, I know it might sound like a bit of a stretch at first, but I promise you the exact same psychological and structural traps that cost a global automaker billions of dollars. Yeah, they are quietly derailing enterprise AI strategies right now as we speak.
So to understand exactly how this happens, we're going to walk through this agenda. First, the clean diesel illusion. 2, engineering the defeat device. 3, the $33 billion reckoning. 4, Goodhart's law in action. 5, AI's hidden defeat device. And finally, 6, measuring outcomes over metrics. Let's get into it.
Section 1, the clean diesel illusion, a genuinely celebrated achievement.
You know, before the massive scandal, there was this incredible period of success. Looking at this timeline sourced directly from the EPA and ICCT, you can see that between 2009 and 2011, Volkswagen's narrative wasn't just accepted, it was universally praised. The VW Jetta and Golf TDI were literally winning Green Car of the Year awards back-to-back. Independent testers were singing their praises, and consumers were absolutely loving the fuel economy. VW claimed they had achieved the impossible, right? A diesel engine that somehow met the absolute strictest U.S. environmental standards. But jump ahead to May 2014. Independent researchers from West Virginia University, commissioned by the International Council on Clean Transportation, published a road test using portable emissions equipment. And the crazy thing is, they weren't even trying to expose VW. They were actually trying to prove that clean diesel worked. But as we now know, that study eventually triggered the EPA's notice of violation in September 2015, completely shattering the illusion.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the discrepancy they found is wild. In perfect laboratory test conditions, these vehicles were spotless, completely clean and compliant. But out in real-world road conditions, the researchers found these cars were emitting nitrogen oxide at levels anywhere from 15 to 35 times the EPA permitted limit. I mean, that gap is so absurdly huge that the researchers actually thought their own equipment was broken at first. But it wasn't. The cars literally knew they were being tested.
Section 2. Engineering the defeat device. Optimizing for the test.
So how exactly does a world-class engineering organization end up building cars with two completely different personalities? Well, it all comes down to corporate targets. VW's leadership had committed to Strategy 2018, which was this aggressive plan to become the world's largest automaker. Clean diesel was supposed to lead that charge in the US. The problem? The engineering reality just couldn't match the marketing promises without ruining the car's performance. So instead of solving the emissions problem, VW engineers solved the test problem. They built a defeat device, which was software secretly embedded in the engine control unit. According to the EPA's notice of violation, here's how it worked. Step 1. The software detected precise EPA test parameters. It knew if the car was stationary by checking the steering wheel position and specific RPM sequences. Step 2. Once it realized, hey, I'm taking a test, it activated an emissions-compliant mode. And Step 3, the exact second those test conditions ended and real-world driving began, it switched that compliant mode completely off to restore the vehicle's normal performance.
Section 3. The $33 billion reckoning. The cost of fake metrics. The gap between a test environment and reality is exactly where a defeat device lives. And when that gap is finally exposed to the world, the fallout is just devastating. $33.3 billion. According to the U.S. Department of Justice plea agreement from January 2017, that is the sheer financial magnitude of this disaster. Civil settlements, massive vehicle buybacks, historical penalties, the whole shebang. That is the ultimate price tag of bad governance and optimizing for fake metrics instead of real outcomes. But you know, the forensic scale of this goes way, way beyond just a dollar amount on a balance sheet. As detailed in those DOJ filings and Jack Ewing's reporting on the crisis, 11 million vehicles globally contained this software. The company paid $4.3 billion in criminal penalties alone, which was the largest ever by an automaker at the time. 6 VW engineers and managers were criminally indicted. Even the CEO, Martin Winterkorn, had to resign and was subsequently indicted. So this wasn't just some minor technical glitch. It was a systemic, catastrophic failure of project management and measurement that resulted in total personal and corporate ruin. Section 4. Goodhart's law in action. The psychological bridge. Now we need to build a psychological bridge between this infamous automotive scandal and the theoretical frameworks driving today's technology projects. And this brilliantly illustrates a fundamental economic principle known as Goodhart's law. coined by British economist Charles Goodhart back in 1975. It states that any observed statistical regularity will tend to collapse once pressure is placed upon it for control purposes. Basically, in plain English, as soon as you force your team to hit a specific metric at all costs, they are going to find a way to hit that metric, even if it totally destroys the actual system they're supposed to be building. VW's Strategy 2018 placed this immense, crushing pressure on passing the emissions test, and the integrity of the engineering just collapsed as a result. Anthropologist Marilyn Strathern summarized this perfectly in 1997. She said, "When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure." And honestly, this quote is the absolute anchor of our explainer today. The nitrogen oxide test was supposed to measure a real environmental outcome, but once that test became the ultimate do-or-die target, it completely ceased to measure anything real. The engineering achievement shifted away from actually lowering emissions and entirely towards successfully tricking the test. Section 5. AI's Hidden Defeat Device, the 2026 Reality. Let's execute a hard pivot over to the 2026 enterprise AI landscape and take this historical lesson directly into your project management dashboards, because what's fascinating is how clearly history is repeating itself here. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is, sourced right from a June 2026 Fortune report, Amazon built an internal AI leaderboard to encourage AI adoption. Sounds great, right? Well, what actually happened, teams engaged in something called token maxing. They artificially inflated their token consumption just to boost their scores on the leaderboard without actually boosting any real-world productivity. They were essentially running their AI engines in clean mode just to pass inspection. Let's map this out directly side by side, sourced from Fortune, Deloitte, and ServiceNow. Over in the VW Dieselgate column, the measurement was the nitrogen oxide emissions test. In modern AI project management, the measurement is AI leaderboards and usage metrics. For VW, the workaround was the literal defeat device software. For modern AI teams, the workaround is token maxing and just chasing vanity metrics. Guys, it is the exact same structural flaw, just in a different decade. And the economic consequences of this are honestly staggering. Look at this data, sourced from the PwC 2026 Global AI Performance Study, which surveyed over 1,000 executives. 74% of all AI economic gains are being captured by just 20% of companies. Let that sink in. The vast, vast majority of economic value is going to a tiny fraction of the market. And why is that? Because that top 20% absolutely refuses to optimize for vanity metrics. They aren't measuring how many licenses they deployed. They are measuring actual, tangible business growth. Meanwhile, the rest of the market is basically flying blind. A 2026 Grant Thornton AI Impact Survey found that 78% of business leaders would outright fail an independent AI governance audit within 90 days. Almost half of them, 46%, cite governance failures as the #1 reason their AI is underperforming. But here is the most important bullet point on this slide. Companies with real auditable governance are 4 times more likely to report actual revenue growth. 4 times! Section 6. Measuring outcomes over metrics. Dismantling your defeat device. So let's talk about dismantling your organization's defeat device. How do we take these lessons and turn them into actionable project management? So the crucial point is understanding the absolute difference between test conditions and production conditions. Under test conditions, if you measure things like AI usage, visible cost reduction, or just the raw number of licenses deployed, well, your teams are going to optimize for exactly that. They will pass the test. But under production conditions, the organizations seeing massive value are measuring new capabilities. They're asking, what can the business do now that it couldn't do yesterday? They measure actual revenue enabled and net new customers reached. Test conditions breed token maxing. Production conditions breed growth. Which brings us to the final and really the most critical question you need to ask yourself and your leadership team today. Is your measurement framework directing your organization's immense capability toward passing a test or toward achieving a real-world outcome? Look, you didn't set out to build a defeat device into your dashboard. Nobody does. But if the test has somehow become more important than the outcome, it might already be there. Dismantle it. Measure what actually matters. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you next time.